Well, welcome to the library part of the museum here. The main feature of this library in many ways is a portrait of Edward Hayward, who brought about a great big change for St John in South Australia. It was not done by an amateur painter. It was in fact Sir Ivor Heel. It was done in 1950 and we have it now in our library here. Now, as chairman of St John, he noted that there were several private ambulance services serving Adelaide. This is before 1952, which didn't cooperate with one another, and that meant that several ambulances could go to the one accident scene. He went to Lyle McEwen, an influential politician in South Australia. He then sent a letter with 11 points setting out how he thought St John could run the entire ambulance arrangements in Adelaide and then in South Australia. Edward Hayward convinced the government to let St John run the ambulance service. It began in 1952 and it lasted until the early 1990s when the government took over the control of the ambulance service. So if you visit the museum and come to the library, you can see why we are especially pleased to have the portrait of Sir Edward Hayward.
I joined Glenelg Division in 1970s. I was there for about 35 years. In the early years, we had no facilities. So we met at various venues around the Glenelg area. And one of those venues was the Glenelg Town Hall to attend various events that happened in the Glenelg area, such as the Bay Sheffield, Milk Cart Regatta, the Birdman Rally, the Glenelg Pageant and many others.
St John took over the ambulance service in 1952, so it was decided that they would look around and try and find a vehicle that was going to be suitable for South Australian conditions. The popular Holden panel van would be an ideal vehicle to start off with. The vehicle itself was able to take on 2 stretchers, one standard ambulance stretcher, which was known as the Wally Leckle stretcher, and the other one was a emergency stretcher, very similar to what the Furley stretcher was, but this was the metal one that folded up with a mattress and could go alongside. Once they was getting to the end of the life stage of the Holdens, they decided that what they would do was to bring out a better type of ambulance, and that was called an M-Care, Emergency Care Ambulance, which had 6 wheels on it, and the back was constructed onto a cab chassis type Holden, and it enabled the people that were working into the back of that vehicle actually to stand up in it. Retrieval teams were able to come into the back of the vehicle, stand up, then move around the patient from side to side, and they were held in place by some safety belts and all that. And about the same time they started to have Ford F100s. They brought the vehicles in as a ute. They took the tray off and built a special canopy onto the back of them, and it became known as a twin life ambulance. The idea was that they would run the ambulance out to the mileage that they considered, then they were able to remove the back off of the vehicle and then put it onto the next one. And this saved them quite a considerable amount of money. The whole concept was excellent, in fact so much so that it won the Duke of Edinburgh Award for that year. And some of the other ambulance service interstates started looking at the same concept.
The Adelaide Motorcycle Division has an interesting past in that the division was originally a motorcycle club. 1932, a group of men got together and formed the Motorcycle Club of SA Ambulance Brigade. They found that there was lots of people getting injured in motorsport and they needed someone to help them, so they formed this first aid club. And they worked really hard to make things good for the motorsport. Around 1949, they came up with the idea of getting 6 motorbike and sidecars together and so they could take them to motorsport. Only one was built, and that one is here today because we managed to get it back from a former member of the division and has been completely restored. Notice it's got a box on the side which is not for carrying passengers, but it's for carrying all the necessary things to take to motorsport, like ropes, jemmy bars, but they didn't last very long because by that time people were starting to drive around in cars more than they were motorbike and sidecars. They had their own unique uniform, didn't have any badges of St John or anything on it. Now in 1939 they joined St John, and that's when they had to put all their badges and everything on their own uniform. They had their own unique first aid kit. Imagine going into scrambles, etc., and finding mud all over the white bag. The division is very unique, and I'm very proud to be part of that history. For people to get together like that and form their own club, realising that people need help, is fantastic.
You mentioned the Furley stretcher, a gentleman by the name of John Furley. He developed what is now known as the Furley stretcher. Basically it consists of two poles with some canvas stretched a nail between them, and they were quite easily, because they could be pushed together and carried by a single person by just throwing it over their shoulder. That was designed to put those stretchers on sort of to a buggy. They got some wheels off of old carts and things like that. So over the years, these have been around, they are still around, and so progressively over the years, these have had some modifications, but they're still around. So you can see that going from the Korean War in the 1800s, today it's still used, so it's an item that's been really worth looking at and designing and keeping. In the early days of the St John, they had trouble removing people from hospitals, especially around Whyalla area in the upper and lower Eyre Peninsula. Distance, it was too great to carry some of these people. A gentleman by the name of Don Jacquia, who was eventually the manager of the lower Eyre Peninsula ambulance service, could see this. To run an ambulance just from Whyalla to Adelaide and return took over 10 hours. He looked around and saw that there was a need to retrieve these people in a better manner. So what he started to do is he looked at some of the local aircraft. He arranged for some of these patients to be picked up from areas like Ceduna and Whyalla and flown to Adelaide. Now, and that proved quite successful. So what he eventually done, unknown to the St John management in Adelaide, he actually purchased an aircraft and he had it fitted out as an ambulance. From that single aircraft, they finished up over the 30 years that the ambulance service ran. They had 25 air ambulances all told. He had a number of pilots. Some of them were ex-Air Force who were trained in air attendant type work, specialised air medical operations and things like that, and which took in the different altitudes and things like whether pressurised aircraft and non-pressurised aircraft and things like that. Eventually the service was handed over to the Royal Flying Doctor Service, who then took up that area, and overall true, it was quite a good service.